What's up? Ghost Fictions is here, and we're back again. This is the part 2 of a story where Issei was the grandson of the god of the devil Satan. But before we start, please consider subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to check the description for more information. Now, let's get into part 2. Issei had been walking home when he felt an eerie presence within a house he had walked by. Turning around, his eyes narrowed when the smell of fresh blood reached his nose. "Breg, do you sense that as well?" Issei asked the dragon. "Yes, I do. It feels as if something inside has already killed all its inhabitants and is still there. Are you suggesting that we check it out?" "You already know." Issei smirked as he ran towards the house. Kicking open the door, the teen observed the amount of gore splattered across the wall. Geez. Someone certainly made a large mess. Walking into the living room, Issei felt a great rage build up within him. He observed the 3 bodies messily crucified to the wall, ridden with cuts and gouges. The signs of torture were obvious, and how that the 3 individuals did not have a fast death. However, it was not the deaths of the adults that angered him, it was the last body that stabbed at his heart. A child, with haunting eyes and brown hair just like his, was staring lifelessly as his mouth was open in an unheard scream. He couldn't have been older than the age of 10, maybe 12. "I'm sorry," Issei whispered to the bodies as he sensed a presence in the other room, attempting an ambush from the back. "Did you do this, exorcist?" The presence stopped moving from being found out. However, he began to laugh manically, adding fuel to Issei's rage. Well. Those are some good senses, you shitty devil. And yes, I did, that's what this shitty family deserves for calling on devils." The exorcist laughed as he brandished a blade of light in his right hand and an exorcist gun in his left. He had white hair and wore the clothes of a priest. "My name's Fried Selzen, what's yours, shithead? Let's have a dance of death together." "My name's Issei Maou, your demise." Issei answered eerily, suddenly turning around, and swung his right fist. Fried was shocked by the speed as he received a backhanded punch to the face, throwing him back against a staircase. Spitting out blood, the stray exorcist grinned madly as he pulled himself up. "I like you, shitty devil. Eat this." Fried began spamming rounds from his exorcist gun, forcing Issei to jump behind a couch to avoid fire. Issei rolled his eyes in exasperation. Even the Ghostbusters weren't close to being this annoying. "Go to hell." Issei shouted back, throwing out a paper talisman which released a substance similar to tear gas. The substance was there to hinder the exorcist's sight and cause minor injury, an excellent distraction. Issei used the chance to conjure crimson flames in his left hand, which he formed into a spear, throwing it as hard as possible. The flame spear, however, was met by the light sword. A maddened grin appearing on Issei's face as the exorcist laughed. "So you want to play with swords? Alright, let's dance." Issei said as divine energy began to radiate off him. This time the energy took on a blue-white color as Issei crafted it into a sword. Grinning at the exorcist, Issei dashed forward. They clashed blades, with the exorcist trying to shoot Issei, only for it to be dodged as Issei backhanded the gun away before locking blades again. Issei opted to kick the exorcist in the shin, making the bastard stagger. Incineration. Issei bellowed, releasing a pulse of white flames. However, the way he'd released them was more akin to an explosion than a flamethrower. However, the exorcist was still grinning, making Issei become more enraged. "I'll kill you, bastard." Issei growled as he clashed swords with the priest again. He's a pretty sloppy swordsman. But with a better weapon or against a normal demon, his fanatical aggression would make up for it. "But I'm no ordinary demon," Issei thought, dropping a flash bomb talisman as he jumped backward swinging his sword in the air. The simple action sent a wave of power at the exorcist, who barely dropped to the floor in time. "TSK. You shitty devil. Damn you." Fried spat as he slowly crawled up. Charging at Issei, the exorcist was sent flying back by a front kick. "Arg. I'm going to kill you, slowly," Issei said flatly. Fried felt a sense of dread as a sinister aura began to exude from his opponent, giving the stray exorcist chills. "And not just that. I will avenge this family." Fried began to crawl back in terror as Issei slowly approached him as the man's introduction came to mind. "I fucked up. Shit. I will break every single one of your bones. I will gouge your eyes out. I will rip you apart." Fried began to scream when he was trapped against the wall, seeing Issei's slow approach. A dark stain appeared between the stray exorcist's pant legs. With an eerie smile, Issei launched a rapid series of pile drivers to his opponent's face. It made Fried scream harder as the punches landed with sickening crunches and snaps. Feeling bored, Issei decided that it was time to end this pitiful fight. Picking Fried up by the neck, he began to choke the former church warrior with his left hand, cutting off his screams. "Scum like you doesn't deserve to live." Issei began chuckling insanely as Fried was forced to look into his eyes, which were filled to the brim with madness. However, the teen was interrupted from his work when he heard a voice call out from the other room. "Issei senpai." His eyes widened, the white cat's voice reaching his ears being enough to snap him out of his madness. "Hey Kaneko-chan?" Issei asked as he turned to see exactly who he thought. His grip on the exorcist became slack as his gaze fell on his junior. "You saw?" A nod. "How much?" he asked, genuinely worried. "Not enough to be bothered." Issei couldn't help but sigh in relief at this. Only to gasp in pain, a light sword piercing his lower abdomen. "Why you bastard?" Issei growled as the exorcist escaped his clutches and ran out the door on wobbly feet. Committing the man's face to memory, Issei ripped the blade out and crushed it. With a limb, Issei walked to Kaneko. "You alright, Kaneko-chan? Did that creep hurt you?" Kaneko's nose wrinkled up for a second. "Yes." Issei's brows furrowed. Why did that sound like a question? "How badly?" "Not too bad. I can still fight." She punctuated her statement by launching a roundhouse kick at Issei's side, making him stumble a little. "Why yep. You're alright." Kaneko then smiled a little before frowning. "Shouldn't we tell Butchu what happened?" Issei sighed, but not at all the same. It took a while, but Issei eventually got all the bodies off the wall and buried them. Calling Riaz using the house's phone, the teen told her all that had happened within the house, with Riaz telling him to go home, as she will have the club members come and deal with everything else. Riaz and her peerage operated under their alias of the Kuo Academy's Occult Research Club. An obvious but still convenient guise considering only those familiar with the occult would have any suspicions. The ironic and likely unintentional genius of it wasn't lost on Issei. Saying thanks, Issei hung up. Maybe they weren't so bad after all. It was almost midnight when Issei finally got home, and he knew that his sister was going to give him a earful in the morning. However, she would understand the circumstances behind his tardiness, so Issei didn't worry about that too much. After being violently nagged at by his sister, he showered and went to sleep. He hoped for a normal day tomorrow. Unfortunately, he woke up in the morning to an irritating sensation. Monsters, and a lot of them. To be exact. Demons, the monstrous kind, and some other malicious creatures. Why had they multiplied overnight? Did everyone want a piece of him that badly? Issei just sighed and went downstairs to see his sister. His sister was 165 centimeters tall and was a busty and curvaceous woman. Her hair was half black and half white, split perfectly down the middle. Her skin was a creamy white, entirely deprived of any blemishes. No freckles, bruises, scars, birthmarks, or anything of the sort, just perfect, milky skin with patches of silver fur in a few places. She was dressed in a red kimono, a single foxtail swishing back and forth happily as she danced around the kitchen and managed multiple cooking activities with practiced ease. 2. No matter how many times I see her, I still cannot believe that she was a magician I used to be wary of. She acts like a kid. Braig said in a voice that seemed both annoyed and embarrassed. Issei couldn't help but nod his head. Braig was right, his sister was one of the oldest non-gods in existence. A creature who was alive to witness the birth of Christ, someone who watched the Tower of Babel fall. She was at least 20-40 years old, maybe much older. Yet despite her age, she called him Ani-chan and acted like an Imato. She was someone said to be the greatest magician in the world, the Queen Mage, who even Draig in his prime couldn't fight without getting a scratch. However, her ears twitched while she was attacking a vegetable with a knife, and she turned to see him. "Must have heard you, Draig." "No, she must have heard your breathing." Braig shot back as Issei looked into his sister's eyes. Her golden eyes, which sparkled happily as she smiled at him. "Hello, Ani-chan. Please, take your seat. Breakfast will be ready shortly," she said in a sing-song voice before going back to cooking. Issei, for his part, just nodded and sat down trying to sense what was in his town. Stray devils, pretty normal. Oni, vampires, revenants, lesser demons, and demons. Evil spirits. Also, exorcists, probably strays and fallen angels. Issei mentally listed off, sighing as he realized he'd be too busy to make it to school. 4. Nothing was too out of the ordinary, apart from his enemies being in greater numbers than usual, which could easily be explained by a few supernatural witnesses of his beating of Rainer last night, making some calls. The lesser demons and demons could be explained away easily, his power had drawn them. After all, they were the kind of creatures who would scramble for his location when they felt his aura, recognizing it as that of their morning star. Issei couldn't help but snort. They were in for the shock of their life if they expected a devil king. His sister soon came over and set the table, speaking as she did so. "So, what's on your mind?" Is Ani-chan feeling guilty for not calling Abasan? Issei shook his head. "Not really. It's the monsters in town that bothers me. I might not be able to make it to school." "So that's WHH." Ani-chan came home late. She mumbled before covering her mouth with the back of her hand and giggling, you know I can handle it myself, don't you? No, if word gets out you're here then it'll be bad. People know who you are, Ni-san. I don't want to risk that kind of trouble, I'm going to deal with it. I'm mostly known as a phantom, a mere horror story, so people won't be sure of who I am. His sister just hummed in response. Issei shook his head and proceeded to dig into the buffet laid out before him. Once he had finished, Issei got up and walked outside. Calling Amaterasu on his cell phone, Issei began to conjure a storm overhead. Hey Amaterasu. Sorry for not calling the past few days, I've been busy. A lot of monsters have been here recently. Issei said flatly, nodding in response to Amaterasu's understanding. He hung up and pocketed his phone. Hey, partner. You gonna use me, or is it bedtime for me? Nap time? Issei said in his mind. Shortly afterwards, he heard Drake's snores. Issei snorted but continued walking nevertheless. It was going to be a long bloody day. With practiced ease, Issei conjured a pillar of flames behind him, completely dispelling the light spear. Issei casually turned around and looked at who'd attacked him. It was a fallen. But this one wasn't normal, the fallen angel was no longer a crow nor a raven. It was a bat. Issei scoffed. The skin was now like dark blue leather, its eyes were those of a dead fish. With glowing purple irises and pupils over black sclera. Its mouth was filled with an assortment of teeth. Crocodile teeth, shark teeth, snake fangs. All in a jagged mess, some even growing out of the nose and lips. Speaking of the nose, it had elongated into a snout. The feathered wings that once axiated on the back were now two bad wings. Its fingers had 3-inch claws on them, its toes sporting talons. Its arms had also been elongated, and its legs had been rotated 360 degrees, with the knees now facing backwards, and the feet had done the same, so they still faced forward. Both feet had 6 toes, with an additional talon coming out from the ankle like a vestigial toe. It now sported a tail, a long tail with spines running down it, which was tipped with a bushy mass of hair, the only hair on its body, everywhere else being completely deprived of hair. A mouth had formed in its stomach, with ram horns growing from its head. The most disgusting part. Its tongue. Its tongue was so phallic shaped that it would have made Issei queasy if he didn't have devil blood and years of conditioning. And the damn thing was hanging out of its mouth, which was foaming with acid. It was a fallen angel who was corrupted by demonic power. And seemingly astray too. It smelled like semen, sweat, vaginal fluid, and blood. The smell infuriated Issei, causing his eyes to become slits. Suddenly, however, he had an idea. The day was still young, and he needed to find a lot of monsters. So what better way to find them than to ring a dinner bell? Issei smirked. Amaterasu. Forgive me. So, a pigeon has fallen lower than a crow, has it? Issei asked mockingly, looking at the creature. It hissed at him. Hunger. Starving. Meat. Blood. Starving, it said before screeching, charging at Issei, who didn't react. Know your place, mad dog. Issei spat coldly, kicking it in the throat at the last second. Servant of God, to beasthood turned, if fallen be thine title, thou shalt attend and know mine. Miniselfart the great devil king of the true blood morning star, and thou shalt not lay hand upon thy king without permission. The fallen merely roared and spread its wings, Issei scoffed. Touch, not, the sky. For by grandfather's will, mine self shall strip thee of the wings. Issei said as a burst of white lightning struck out at his enemy, splitting the skies and broke through the fog and the ceiling. It zapped the fallen and slammed it into the ground, the thunderbolt embedding itself into the creature's back. Issei approached the spasming fallen, who was desperately trying to get up. Issei placed his foot on its back, sneering. A lesser creature like thyself has no business laying their hands upon mine self. Issei spat on the creature, grinding his heel against a vertebrae. Filthy mongrels belong in the dirt, they've no right to wings. Issei gripped the wings and lightly tugged on them. The slight moan of pleasure confirmed to Issei that it was, indeed, a fallen. He smirked, he slowly stretched the wing and pulled progressively harder. After nearly 3 entire minutes, the wings were torn out of the fallen, taking some vertebrae with them. Issei chuckled and kicked the fallen over, the thunderbolt dissipating. With a sadistic smile, he jammed the wings into the abdominal mouth, feeding the beast its own wings. Issei chuckled, drawing some runes on the beast's chest. These runes resulted in rings of light binding the creature, keeping it from moving. Issei's grin grew as he reached down and looked into the creature's eyes. They were filled with 5 emotions. Hunger, pain, anger, pleasure, and absolute terror. Issei's grin grew in response, poking one of the creature's eyes. You don't need this anymore, right? He asked as reached into the socket and ripped the eyeball out. The creature wailed in agony, bleeding profusely, as Issei dropped the eye into the fallen's mouth. The creature greedily swallowed it, lapping up its own blood like it was on the verge of dehydration. Issei grinned madly, unbothered by the blood and acid that pooled at his feet. Ha ha ha, Issei said madly, watching the creature eating its own tail like it was the best popsicle in the world. The creature was starved, so starved that it would try to get sex fluids out of its victims before devouring them. It was a monster in the truest sense. And as the creature feasted upon its own flesh, blood, and bone, it let out moans and groans. Sounds of pleasure, pain, and contentment, happy to be filling its belly. Despite hurting itself in the process. Issei looked back to the wings, which were nearly done being consumed. Issei got up and went to the tail, cutting it off with an energy blade, causing the creature to scream in agony, even while eagerly and greedily eating its own tail. Issei, in his moon blood-drunk state, couldn't help but laugh in utter sadistic ecstasy. Grinning, he began to peel off the creature's claws, feeding them into the belly mouth. It greedily swallowed, despite them tearing and slicing the skin. It drank the blood too. Issei then started to break off the fingers and toes, one at a time. Each time, the creature thrashed about in vain. Each time, it screamed in pain before moaning in delight. Even when being fed its own fingers into the lower mouth, it moaned happily. Issei's grin was now so large it looked as if it was about to bisect his head. The tail was now finished being eaten, and the fallen's head laying in a puddle of its own drool with his eye rolled into the back of its head. Ha ha ha. You masochistic. He cackled. He then grabbed a leg and tore it off, this time shoving the appendage into the fallen's rectum. The creature in pleasure and Issei ripped off the other leg, causing its scream of clear ecstasy to grow louder. It was only then that Issei noticed. It had no bulge, his grin somehow grew, tearing his skin slightly. Ahahaha. You absolute slut. Just a starving, masochistic whore, aren't ya? Despite her severe wounds, the constant feeding had allowed her to regenerate, especially because she did seem to be a more exotic and endangered kind of demon. A succubus that fed off raw emotion, blood, and flesh. The feeding had allowed her to regenerate, much to the devil's delight. Issei chuckled darkly and tore off her arms, feeding them to her before he gripped her horns. You disgusting little mongrel. It's a shame you had to become a rabid stray. I bet you were a fine pet before, weren't you? He asked with his grin still present. Issei, deciding enough was enough, opted to give her that mercy he'd promised. He ripped the horn out of the skull, taking a piece of the skull with it, before he slowly slid the horn into her brain. She squirmed and thrashed under him, despite her binds, as she screamed in pleasure. Issei couldn't help chuckle, the fallen had orgasmed from having her brain pierced. As he hooked her brain on the horn, she screamed even louder. Issei looked down at the corpse, breathing heavily from all the hysterical laughter and shouting, as well as his adrenaline rush wearing off. Slowly, his eyes turned to normal as his sanity came back to him. Issei was bathed in black blood. Slowly, he looked around the warehouse. And saw what he expected. More monsters had come, drawn by the sound of screams and the smell of blood. Issei remained stoic, analyzing his enemies. Lesser demons, oni, ghouls, a new one for this town, vampires, and revenants. However, Issei was not afraid. He was the prince of devils, after all. Simple monstrosities didn't frighten him in the slightest. Welcome, ladies and not so gentle men, to purgatory. I'll show you all a true devil. He greeted coldly as crimson flames began to snake around the warehouse, cutting off all escape routes. I am Issei Maou, your tormentor. He said his full name, watching as they all seemed nervous, confused, or angry. Issei didn't care, not at all. Their feelings were irrelevant, their deaths were inevitable. Sensing a presence behind him, Issei jumped and did a backflip midair. He saw the blade slicing through the space he occupied microseconds earlier. In the short fraction of a second Issei looked at the creature from above, he saw what it was. It was an odd lesser demon. It was like a skeleton with no lower body, draped in darkness, and wielding a scythe. Issei knew what it was, a sin scythe. A lesser demon made to collect souls for the old devils. The first members of the species were made using bones and vengeful spirits. They were an amalgamation of curses, souls, and dark energy grafted onto a frame of dragon bone. That reproduced by infecting mortal bodies. Issei wasn't particularly bothered, however. He just landed on his feet and blasted the enemy with a beam of sunlight. The battle was on. From the left, a vampire wielding only its natural power charged. From the left, an oni wielding a halberd charged. Ragin no Yoroi. Issei exclaimed, white lightning striking down to form crude armor over his body. The lightning also spread along the ground, paralyzing the oni. The vampire jumped backwards. Issei dropped a talisman which exploded like a flashbang, jumping into the air and slicing the air with his hand. The simple action sent out a wave of black lightning that fried, melted, and boiled several Hell Knights lesser demons who used to act as gladiators. The oni in front of him was incinerated by the attack. Issei threw out another talisman, aiming for a horde of lesser demons, which exploded into holy water. The demons withered away swiftly, bullets flying his way. Issei effortlessly caught them in his left hand, throwing the exorcist bullets at the vampires in the room. Some of the bullets hit home, doing severe internal damage to the vampires. Issei noticed a vampire wielding a demonic sword behind him. He caught the arm holding the sword and swung the vampire over his shoulder, slamming him into the concrete. Issei immediately plunged his hand into the vampire, tearing out its spine. Filling it with demonic energy, Issei used the spine as a makeshift stake and drove it through the vampire's heart. It started to crumble to ash, with more enemies moving in. This time, they were ghouls. Issei flipped backwards to avoid the swinging of an axe and a sledgehammer, landing in a handstand and kicking both ghouls in the face, one leg each. Issei then jumped off the ground using his hands and flipped forward in midair, going into a dropkick. Issei wreathed his leg and blew hellfire as he kicked an Oni into the ground, kicking off of it into a midair backflip and coming down to punch an imp's skull in. Issei immediately rolled to the side, using his bare hand to chop off the arm of a revenant. Issei instantly plunged his other hand into the body, ripping out the intestines before dropping them and kicking the dying revenant backwards. It caused a few scarecrow demons to fall over. Issei then elbowed a ghoul behind him before quickly spinning around to kick straight through it, splitting it in two. He jumped over a charging baron, minotaur-like demons that served as the former guardians of the demonic nobility, kicking it in the back to knock it to the ground. Issei landed on it and gripped its horn, ripping it off before smashing the horn into the creature's head. Issei lunged for a ghoul, dodging several swings of a katana, before he plunged his hands into its chest and tore it in half. Several punches from an Oni bounced off Issei's lightning armor, and Issei turned around and kicked the head off the ogre-like yokai. Issei landed in a crouch, discharging a wave of concussive energy when he touched the ground. Then he shot forwards, before backflipping and kicking a large demon in the chin. This had stunned the demon, and Issei took the large club from the demon, swinging it around to smash the club into the demon's chest. Discarding the club, Issei then rolled to the side, going into a sliding kick to trip a revenant. Grabbing its arm as he slid under it, Issei barrel rolled and slammed the revenant into the ground and punched its skull in. Backflipping, Issei narrowly avoided a blast from a holy shotgun. Issei instantly shot forwards once he landed, ripping the holy shotgun from the revenant's grasp. Issei then spun like a ballerina as he pivoted left before shooting the monster at point blank. A stray devil charged Issei, but Issei punched it in the kidney, doing a quick breakdance-like maneuver to trip up all of the monsters around him. With merely a grunt, Issei released a small explosion of divine energy. The simple explosive blast had destroyed the stray and many other monsters. Issei suddenly backstepped before slamming a demon into a wall, ripping off the demon's leg to bash in the head of the monster. From enemy to enemy, the devil went killing each with brutal efficiency and barbarous cruelty. The savagery with which he caught would have made even his grandfather sweat. The morning star Lucifer himself wasn't half as heartless when he turned against his father, Elohim. All the while, Issei was silent. His eyes were cold, devoid of any life. There was no pity, there was no mercy, there was no fear. Only the heartless and brutal efficiency of a Terminator. Finally, the last enemy fell to the ground, lifeless. And Issei was bathed in blood of multiple colors. However, his mission wasn't yet over. Monster sounds came from outside, and the devil grinned. With but a wave of his hand, the flames died down at one door to allow the enemies in. It was when they saw what was on the other side of the flames that the monsters finally understood the definition of the word helpless. Standing in a sea of blood was not an exorcist. Nor was it a cannibalistic vampire or ghoul, but a devil. Death itself. They looked at it, and it looked back at them. And they could say nothing to dissuade it from adding them to the head count. For hours the battle continued, with a monster among monsters bathing in the blood of the wicked. Eventually, even a natural enemy of the dragons, a centipede Imkai, arrived. Sending arrows of divine energy at the Japanese demon, the dragon in human skin charged it. He jumped over the demon, grabbing one of its centipede segments and splitting it down the middle. The monster roared in pain, yet the devil was unfazed. He merely released a burst of white flames at point blank, searing the Imkai. With practiced ease, the devil crushed the burned head underfoot and pulled the centipede, puppeteering the body out through the neck, relishing in its cries as it tried to feebly resist, as well as the sound of it tearing and breaking. Eventually, the centipede was torn out and cremated. The battle was finally over. The blood boiling off of the devil as the warehouse crumbled around him. Without looking back, the devil left the burning building behind to continue his hunt. Issei returned home around the time school would ordinarily end. The storm and fog had long since dissipated, and Issei was mentally exhausted. His hunt had been long and brutal, yet he wasn't able to find all the monsters, and he had nearly lost sight of himself in the carnage. In such a populated area, no less. That was the reason Issei immediately took a shower and flopped down on his bed in just his boxers, too exhausted to even put on pajamas or anything of the sort. Ani-chan had a rough day. You have no idea. Issei mumbled, rolling over as his sister sat on the bed beside him. I'm sorry Issei, you've been suffering for so long and I've hardly done anything to help you. The woman whispered as she massaged Issei's shoulders. That's not true. You helped train me, I wouldn't have reached this point so soon if not for you. And you do all the housework for me too, if you didn't handle all of those chores, then I wouldn't get nearly as much done in a day. So, thank you. Issei responded. The woman blushed in response and giggled. Fufufu, I didn't realize Ani-chan was a Siskin. She teased with a bright smile. Issei said nothing, only sticking up a finger before letting himself fall back onto the bed. Heh. Sweet dreams, Issei. I'm glad you didn't come home late this time. Issei didn't respond, just closing his eyes and allowing himself to drift off. Haunting green eyes, ethereal crimson armor, a crazed and bloodthirsty smile, and a burning presence. Cut up, scratched, scarred, and bruised. Charred, seared, burned, and melted. From the ends of his hair to the tips of his toes, caked in blood. Mind broken, heart shattered. It was thanks only to sheer power that the man held his crumbling flesh together. He was the Red Knight. A broken man who had lost everything and forgotten his humanity. For the sake of vengeance, he killed. He killed. He killed. He killed. 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 He killed so many for so long that he forgot his own name and killed some more. He stood alone in an ocean of blood. He stood alone in a city of graves. He stood alone atop a mountain of corpses. He was always alone. Never once knowing defeat, never once obtaining victory, the orphan withstood pain and countless battles without compensation. Unknown to death nor known to life, he wandered the world with nothing to lose. He never reached his limit, he'd long since abandoned it. I knew that man. I'd seen him before. I was familiar with that ominous warrior. He was me. An Issei from the past. Or another future. He was a mistake. Issei awoke to a grating sound, roused from his slumber as he rolled out of his bed. He threw on a trench coat and began to drag himself into the living room. Blood. I saw hell. Flames. I saw hell. Screams. I saw hell. Corpses. I saw hell. Graves. I saw hell. Issei opened the door, ready to tear whatever was on the other side limb from limb if necessary. Imagine his surprise when the creature in question was a teenage woman with black hair and a bob cut and violet eyes. It was the student council president. What brings you here, Sona? Issei asked flatly, his eyes that of a dead fish. You didn't show up for school, so I took it upon myself to bring you your homework. Sona answered flatly. Is that all? Surely the student council president wouldn't come here just to deliver the mail. Issei responded. Sona remained quiet for a few moments before taking a breath and relaxing her posture. May I come in? Against my better judgment, I'm letting you in. Now, hustle, before I change my mind. Issei said as he stepped to the side, watching as Sona quickly walked inside. What are you after? Bigger than I expected, Haidu. Your house, I mean. Do you come from a wealthy family? Sona mused. Something like that. Issei responded as he gestured for her to sit by a table as he headed into the kitchen. I'll make some tea, you take a seat at the table. So, care to explain why you missed school? Sona asked as she took a seat. Monster hunting. Issei responded dryly. Monsters? Are you saying there were goblins running amok? Sona inquired, vaguely amused. No, I wouldn't waste my time on something a human with a firearm could kill. Issei answered bluntly. Then what do you consider a monster? Something with a degree of mysticism that is an active threat to the world of man. Vampires, revenants, stray devils, ghouls, oni, lesser demons. Issei didn't get the chance to finish. I'm going to stop you there. Did you say lesser demons? She asked. Yes, demons who are incapable of reasoning. You, Sona, are a greater demon. That means your mind is closer to that of a human, despite being selfish by nature. However, lesser demons are driven by instincts above all. During the Great War, Hell used them as cannon fodder. They are the cogs in the machine that was the hordes of Hell. Issei explained as he made the tea. They exist to serve the greater demons, devils, who created them. And as you know, many of the demon pillar descended bloodlines are extinct. Sona's eyes widened a little. You seem to know a lot, Haidu. I'm impressed. And it had never crossed my mind until now that demons without a master would be rabid animals. I know many things, not all of which are public knowledge. Issei said bluntly. I see. What did you get on the last IQ test you took? Sona asked curiously. If I scored any higher, it wouldn't fall within human limits. So you're intelligent, are you? Sona questioned. To be entirely factual, that's a gross understatement. Issei responded as he brought the tea to her and sat down across from her. Oh? Can you calculate equations with degrees of infinity? Sona asked. At that, some life appeared in Issei's eyes. Try me, Ice Queen. Aleph null times pi to the power of Google over omega times infinity squared. Omega plus Google over epsilon naught to the power of Aleph null, in other words, the magical formula for creating self-contained ephemeral microcosmos phantasms. Issei responded with a savage grin. Omega over 0 to the power of Googleplex times the cubic root of epsilon naught. Sona fired back. I over 0 divided by Google to the 13th, the formula for creating souls. Issei answered instantly, still grinning. Well. It seems your intelligence is no bluff. Sona said. Oh, really? I didn't notice. Issei replied sarcastically. I do, judging by your knowledge of the supernatural and inhumane mathematics, I'd hazard a guess that you're quite powerful. Would you mind telling why you sought it? Sona asked. 2 reasons. To protect my loved ones and Morningstar. Issei answered bluntly, although the answer was slightly outdated. Sona raised an eyebrow. Lucifer. The Lucifer clan or the Devil King throne? Yes. Explain. Sona said sternly. You're a smart girl, Sona, figure it out. Besides, everything will be revealed in time, and I'd like the semblance of ordinary life to last a bit longer, okay? Issei responded as he stood up. Now then, I have to ask that you leave. I have business to attend. Issei then turned and left. Humans had the belief that demons were evil creatures, and while it was certainly true that they have an affinity for evil, it isn't as if they're inherently bad people. However, humanity's belief wasn't mistaken. It was simply outdated. In the past, no one would contest it. I know that. Rather, I have always known that. However, I never understood just why it was that humans were so fearful of demons. Until I saw it. That night, when I was at some sort of celebration in the underworld. I learned. I saw, I heard, I smelled, I felt exactly what it means to go to hell. It was only for a short time, but I was invited to hell that night. I cannot forget it. The heat, the screams, the gore, the smoke, the death. But above all, I cannot forget the man. That man who by the definition of humans was far more worthy of being called a Maou than my sister or her colleagues. He is forever carved into my memory. That form, that glow, that blazing armor. That blade that seemed to sunder the world itself. Awe-inspiring and terrifying. To be sure, those are very memorable. But those aren't what haunt me. What haunts me is the eye, the lone eye that I saw for a never-ending blink of an eye. A black sclera that seemed to suck in light from the surroundings, and a serpentine green iris with a violet ring around it. The ominous gleam rising from within the black void. And the letter in place of the pupil. The fearsome, menacing eye of depravity. Yet in that depravity, there existed an undeniable beauty. The allure of the abyss. No matter how much time passes, that eye is the one thing that I will never forget. Because it was the only pretty thing that one could latch onto in that repulsive scene. The lone distraction from the horror. And whoever possessed that eye, that apocalyptic figure, is a true devil in my eyes. I sincerely hope that I never see that eye or that hell again, but why is it that I was not slain? Why was I overlooked? Why did the Red Knight allow me to live? I do not know. And in truth, I would rather not find out. But it does not change the fact that I am curious. Now, the girl who witnessed such things sits alone at a table in a house not her own, with frigid blood. Issei possessed a green eye, on the same side as that man, and seemed intimately familiar with the old ways of the devils, and admitted to a tie to the Lucifer clan of some sort. Is he? Is the man Riaz continually described as being abnormally patient and kind, even if rough around the edges, the same as the devil from that night? At that time, I feared whatever business Issei was attending to. Issei turned and looked towards the church, magic was radiating from it. Partner, they may be trying to take the girl's sacred gear. Not if I deport those bastards first. Issei exclaimed, quickly casting a speed spell on himself. Issei moved through the streets like a gust of wind and quickly reached the front of the church. The fluctuations were getting more erratic, meaning the extraction process was almost done. He had to hurry. Sorry about this, God. Issei offered an apology to the biblical God and unceremoniously kicked down the door. The inside of the church was almost pitch black, dimly lit only by moonlight. Ehoo. Issei looked up at the sound of an overly enthusiastic greeting to see a white-haired teenage boy dressed in priest's clothes leap down from the rafters, a crazed look on his face. It was Freed. You again, oh he. Out of my way. Issei cut him off and punched him in the gut with a lightning-coated fist. The stray priest hunched over in pain, coughing up blood. Fuck. He lost consciousness and slumped to the ground, a fist-sized burn on his torso and blood pouring out of his mouth. Issei felt fluctuations of energy coming from below the church and kicked the altar aside, revealing a staircase leading down. Descending quickly, he reached a set of iron doors. Inside, he could hear a girl screaming in pain. Shit. He kicked down the door and was greeted by the sight of dozens of stray priests gathered in front of an altar, with Asia tied to a wooden cross, screaming in pain. In front of her were 3 fallen angels, a tall man, a tall woman, and a gothic Lolita girl. "Who the hell are?" one of the stray priests began to demand of him, but Issei cut him off by jumping up and landing on his head. Using the heads of the stray priests as stepping stones, Issei made his way to the altar, but just as he reached it. Flash. There was a bright flash of green light, and 2 silver rings with green gems embedded in them floated out of Asia's body, wrapped in green light. Asia's sacred gear had been successfully extracted. Asia slumped, the extraction process having taken a huge toll on her body. The tall woman collected the rings. Cursing, Issei leapt up to the altar and kicked the 3 fallen angels aside. He sliced off the ropes tying Asia to the cross with a bolt of lightning and caught her as she fell forward into his arms. Meanwhile, the 3 fallen angels recovered from the kick. "You little." Issei pulled a talisman from his pocket as the tall man began cursing him. He shut his eyes as the talisman exploded in a bright flash of white light, blinding the fallen angels and the stray priests, disorienting them and causing to fall into a panic. Using the opportunity, Issei escaped the underground chamber with Asia in his arms. Issei ascended the stairs and returned to the nave. He noticed that the stray priest he had defeated was gone. A trail of blood led out of the doors. That guy was actually able to get up and walk away in the short time Issei was down there. He was briefly impressed before he sat Asia down on one of the benches. Her body was slowly getting colder. "Asia. Asia." Issei attempted to wake Asia up by calling her name. Asia's eyes opened slightly, revealing tired green eyes, most of their light having already faded. "Issei-san." "Yeah, it's me. Sorry I'm late. I'm happy. You came to save me." "Of course I did, that's what friends are for, right? Friends?" From the corner of her dim eyes, tears slowly leaked out. "I'm so happy to have a friend. Even if it was only for a short while." Asia turned her head to look at the ceiling of the church. "Issei-san. I don't think I have much time left. Before I leave, will you listen to my story?" "Sure." Issei gritted his teeth and agreed. This was one of the times he really wished he didn't suck at healing technique so much. Asia told Issei a story of a girl who was once called a holy maiden. In a certain region in Europe, she was abandoned by her parents. A nun took her in and raised her with other orphans in the local church. The girl, having grown up a faithful believer in the biblical God, discovered a wonderful power granted to her by her Lord at the age of 8. Using her wondrous healing power, she healed a wounded puppy she found, and her act was witnessed by a member of the Catholic Church. From there, her life changed. She was brought to the Catholic Church and was praised as a holy maiden for her power. She used her powers to heal many believers who were told that power was a gift from their Lord. Rumors begot more rumors, becoming more outlandish with each one, and she became known as a holy maiden, all without her consent. But she didn't mind. The members of the church were always kind to her, and she liked healing people to begin with. She was happy that her power could be of use and thanked her Lord for granting that power to her. But she was also lonely. In the Catholic Church, she didn't have any friends that she could open up to. Everyone around her treated her nicely, but also kept her at a distance, not willing to be her friend, and even she could understand the reason. None of them ever saw her as a fellow human being, but as a creature that could heal them. Then, one day, everything changed again. There happened to be a wounded devil nearby. She couldn't ignore it because it was in her nature to heal anyone who was injured, even if they were her enemies. And so she healed him. But that act was witnessed by a member of the church who informed the higher-ups. Needless to say, they were mortified. There were other people who possessed the power of healing as well, but none of them could heal devils. The higher-ups believed it was only logical that the power of healing granted by God could not heal fallen angels or devils. However, there was a similar incident in the past where there was someone who could heal even the fallen angels and devils who had fallen out of God's grace. But that power was feared as the power of a witch. And so, the girl was branded as a heretic. The girl who had been praised as a holy maiden suddenly fell from grace and was feared as a witch and was thus thrown out of the church. With nowhere left to go, she had no choice but to join the Gregory, where she received the protection of the fallen angels. But even then, she never forgot to pray to her Lord, nor did she forget to thank him. But even so, she was abandoned. God did not save her. And no one from the church was willing to defend her because no one cared enough to do so. It must be because I didn't have enough faith. Because I'm clumsy and good for nothing else besides healing. Even now, this must be happening to me because I didn't have enough faith in the Lord. As he listened to her story, Issei's fists tightened to the point where his palms were beginning to bleed. Strange. Gods were not kind beings. Issei was perfectly aware of that, and he was also aware that his divine great-grandparents, even his sadistic great-grandfather, were much kinder than most gods. However, according to Amaterasu, the biblical God was one of the most benevolent gods in existence. Without fail, he would surely answer his followers' prayers. Even during the Great War, the biblical God had been reluctant to fight until he was left with no other option. So, something had to be wrong for the biblical God to not save this kind soul dying in front of him. And Issei should have been able to tell that something was wrong if his mind wasn't currently clouded by rage. In his current state, he was unable to connect the dots and see that something had to be wrong. Right now, the only thing he could think of was cursing the biblical God. Hey, Issei-san. If I were to be born again, would you still be my friend? Issei gently pressed his forehead against Asia's cooling one. You don't have to worry about that. Someone as kind as you will surely ascend to heaven. And if you are reborn, that's even less reason to worry. I'll still be your friend. So, rest easy. By the time you wake up again, the world will surely be a kinder place. Asia smiled. Even as she was dying, her smile was still radiant. Thank you. Asia whispered and closed her eyes. Issei felt her life force fade and her pulse stop. She was gone. Bam. The floor behind him exploded as the 3 fallen angels blasted through, followed by the stray priests. There you are, you damn brat. You're gonna pay for that. The male fallen angel growled at him. Then, he saw Asia's body lying on the bench. Oh, so the bitch is dead, huh? Good riddance, her sacred gear was the only thing she was good for. Oh, did you come all the way here just to play hero? Too bad for you, you were a bit too late. Issei's eye twitched when the fallen angels and the stray priests behind him burst into manic laughter. Issei stood up, slowly, as an ominous black glow surrounded his body. You know, I was actually going to leave you 3 idiots alone, even after the other one's pathetic attempt to kill me. What? You're the sacred gear brat that Rainer was sent to kill, the gothic Lolita fallen angel exclaimed, but Issei ignored her. But now. Issei slowly turned around, and the fallen angels and stray priests froze in place when they saw the malevolence in his eyes. You've really gone and pissed me off. At that point, Issei's body was coated in black flames that even the fallen angels, as arrogant as they were certain would kill them instantly. As they tried to escape, Issei snapped his fingers. Immediately, a barrier surrounded the church. The fallen angels crashed into the barrier as they flew through the shattered windows and fell back down to the ground. It's no use. Even though this barrier is low level by my standards, trash like you have no hope of breaking through it before I kill you. Issei took slow steps towards them, black fire trailing behind him, but not burning anything, not even the wooden structure of the church. I guess it's fortunate Asia's already passed on. She won't have to see this. The burst of horrific, dreadful, black aura sent the fallen angels and the stray priests to their knees, barely to raise their heads enough to see the boy. No, the monster standing before them. As they looked into his eyes, they felt as if they were sinking into a deep abyss, utterly devoid of light. Blood began to pour from several stray priests' eyes, mouth, nose, ears, and even anus. Scream all you want, cry all you want, beg all you want. No one is coming to save you. Not your masters, not your comrades, and most certainly not God. Limbs and appendages contorted at unnatural angles, snapping bones like toothpicks and rendering limbs useless. Yet no necks were snapped. Hell hath no torment greater than mine. The black flames wrapped themselves into the shape of blazing black claws around Issei's forearms. Prepare yourselves, I won't grant you an easy death. I'll strip you of every last shred of dignity, pride and hope you have. You will suffer at my hands like Asia did at yours, and then you will die like dogs at my feet. With those final words, Issei leapt at his victims, claws outstretched like a demon of old. Pained, fearful and hopeless screams filled the night, but no one would save them from the wrath of the devil tearing through them. Riaz and her peerage arrived at what appeared to be a scene from the 9th circle of hell itself. She was aware that a sacred gear-bearing nun had walked into town the other day. The only church in town was abandoned and occupied by fallen angels, so she figured that the nun was astray. She wasn't expecting said nun to meet Issei of all people, but heaved a sigh of relief when he simply escorted her to the church without starting a fight. She didn't fancy her territory becoming ground zero for the next great war. Then, the night of the next day, she sensed a surge of energy coming from the church and panicked when she felt Issei moving at incredible speed towards it. For a few moments, all was quiet as the surges of energy ended. Then there was a gigantic burst of malicious energy that sent Riaz down to her knees. She recovered and contacted the rest of her peerage, and they headed for the church, struggling against the malice that grew stronger the closer they were to the church. They finally got to the top of the hill where the church was built, almost dead on their feet from the effort it took to get there and froze in terror at the scene in front of them. The church was engulfed in ominous black flames. No, engulfed was the wrong word, as the flames were not burning the church itself. The flames were simply spewing out of every opening, wrapping themselves around the building, but not actually burning the building itself. Riaz noted that there was a powerful barrier surrounding the church, one that she could not break easily, not even with the power of destruction. But at the same time, the barrier felt sloppy, as though it had been hastily cast without any preparation beforehand. But what terrified them the most were the screams. Sweet Satan, those screams. Ria's was no stranger to screams of pain. She had killed several stray devils before, not to mention the few fallen angels here and there unlucky enough to cross her path, but these screams were on a completely different level. Someone, please save me. Why? Why won't these flames go out? Ah, it hurts, it hurts, it hurts. What happened to my eyes? Why can't I hear an imo my arms? The sheer pain, fear and despair she heard in those screams terrified even a high-class devil like her. She wondered just what had happened. The church doors burst open and a male fallen angel, though one had to look really hard to tell, engulfed in the black flames, his skin blistering and melting to reveal his innards, flew out and crashed into a barrier. He clawed desperately at the barrier, trying to get out and caught sight of them. He looked at them with scorched, haunted and desperate eyes, and begged them for help. Please. Please save me. Don't let that monster. Squelch. He was abruptly cut off when a claw of black flames burst through his chest, gripping his heart. Ah. Gah. The fallen angel gurgled incoherently as copious amounts of blood poured out of his mouth. Then, the claw pulled out and ripped out the fallen angel's heart, and the fallen angel fell to the ground, blood pooling and vaporizing around his burning body. Riaz looked up to get a good look at the owner of the claw, and paled when she saw Issei. Wreathed in black flames, cold and ruthless eyes surveying the destruction he had wrought without a hint of regret, sorrow, or sympathy. Riaz shivered as she realized just how dangerous Issei truly was. And worst of all, he didn't appear to be serious yet. Despite the huge amount of flames engulfing the entire building and the length of time he'd been maintaining them, he didn't appear the least bit winded. Riaz wondered just how much of his real power was he still hiding. Issei turned back to the nave. And then there was one. Any last words? Issei spoke to a tall fallen angel woman, whose legs were consumed by the black flames that were slowly beginning to spread to the rest of her body. She was holding her hands out towards her burning legs, and Riaz could faintly make out a green light coming from her hands. No, from the silver rings on her fingers. Riaz realized that it was the nun's sacred gear. The fact that the fallen angel was using it meant that it had been extracted, meaning the nun had died. Was that the reason Issei was slaughtering them? They had only met once, and Issei was avenging her death. Then, Riaz noticed something else. It was quiet. Not completely silent, she could hear the leaves of nearby trees rustling in the wind, the black flames crackling, but the most prominent sound, the screaming, had stopped, and Riaz knew why. Everyone else was dead, incinerated by the black flames until not even ashes remained. The night was almost serene without all the screaming, though the image was still somewhat soiled by the black flames and the few splashes of blood here and there that weren't close enough to the flames to be vaporized. Why? This sacred gear is supposed to heal any wound, so why won't it heal my legs? The fallen angel, her face filled with fear and despair, screamed. Riaz realized that she was right. Even though she was using the healing power of the sacred gear, none of her wounds were healing. It's working. If you weren't using that sacred gear's power, you'd have been ashes minutes ago. The fact that you're still suffering proves that the gear is working, just not fast enough to overcome my flames. Issei slowly started walking towards her with an impassive look on his face. I'll ask you again, any last words? Wait. What is it you want? I'll give you anything you want, so please, just spare me. The fallen angel, stripped of her pride, begged pathetically for her life. Issei paused in his steps, and if Riaz could see his face, she would be able to see that he had an eyebrow raised. Really? Then, bring Asia back to life. The fallen angel froze at the impossible request. I can't do that, she admitted in a quiet voice. I see. Issei raised his hand, and the black flames in the area gathered and formed a giant black fireball. Wait. I can't do that, but I can find someone who looks like her to replace her. You're useless to me. Die. Issei coldly cut her off and threw the fireball at her. Without any time to even scream, the fallen angel was erased from the mortal plane with no trace left behind. The black flames vanished. Having burned only the stray priests and the fallen angels, if it weren't for the few splashes of blood here and there, it would be impossible to tell that this had just been the scene of a one-sided massacre. The barrier around the church vanished, and the oppressive aura around Issei faded away. Drip. Riaz blinked when a droplet of water gently touched her nose. She looked up to see that black clouds had gathered overhead and rain was beginning to fall. The rain washed away the remaining droplets of blood, completely erasing any trace of the earlier bloodshed. Riaz looked back at the church to see Issei walking out with a body in his arms. A girl a bit younger than herself, with blonde hair and beautiful smooth skin. Riaz had to admit the girl was quite pretty. Riaz noticed 2 silver rings on the middle finger of each hand. Issei must have retrieved her sacred gears. For the first time since they arrived, Issei caught sight of them and his eyes narrowed. Is there a reason you're here, Ria's Gremory? From his tone, Riaz knew he wasn't in a good mood, and so she treaded lightly. We felt the fallen angels making their move, so we came to investigate. Though, it looks like you beat us here. HMPH, I was still too late to save Asia though. Can't you revive her? Riaz asked. She knew he was capable of many things, so it didn't seem too much of a stretch for him to be able to revive the dead. If I could, I would have already done it. I suck at healing magic. Issei admitted, walking past her without another word. What do you intend to do with her body? Give her a proper burial. Don't be so hasty. I still have this, you know. Riaz took out a remaining bishop piece and waved it in the air. Issei's eyes sharpened, and Riaz wondered if she had just signed her own death warrant. Then, his eyes softened and he grimaced slightly before setting the nun's body down on the ground and turning around. Hurry up. Riaz blinked at his consent before shaking her head and placing the bishop piece on the nun's chest. I'll need her name for the process. Asia Argento. In the name of Riaz Gremory, I command you. Asia Argento, I bring you back to this earth as a newly reincarnated devil. You, my bishop, rejoice in your new life. The bishop piece sank into Asia Argento's chest. For a few moments, there was silence. Then, Asia's eyes opened and she sat up, looking around in a daze. Huh? Then, she caught sight of Issei. Issei-san. Yeah, it's me. But, I have monsters to hunt, so I can't stay. Sorry. Issei responded with a softer gaze than she'd ever seen on him. Oh. Yeah. So, see you later. Issei made to leave, but paused in his tracks. Riaz Gremory. I'll definitely find a way to repay you. Then, without waiting for a response, Issei disappeared from sight in a flash of crimson lightning. Riaz stared at the spot that he had just vacated and giggled. He really is at Sundeer. More of Issei's past is revealed, and it seems he may have finally bitten off more than he can chew. What will become of the Sekiryuutei? Issei had just finished school for the day and was heading to meet up with Kiba. However, something got in the way. It was Asia. Oh, hey Asia. He patted her head gently, causing her to blush lightly. Riaz Butcho W wants to see you, she said shyly. Issei smiled. Alright, let's go see what it's all about. Hi. Asia agreed happily as they made their way to the Occult Research Club. Issei was standing in front of the whole peerage of Riaz Gremory. Everyone, with the exception of Asia, was wary and a little afraid of the person in front of them. Though, they sometimes wondered why, since the young man in front of them would occasionally absent-mindedly stare at a butterfly like a 3-year-old. To his defense, when nobody in the room has enough courage to talk to you, it's easy to get distracted by things like a butterfly in front of a window. So Issei, I guess that you have a sacred gear. After yesterday it's pretty much obvious. Riaz trailed off at the end of her sentence when she noticed Issei was staring out of the window and completely ignoring her. She gained a tick mark and wanted to say something when her queen took a cup of tea and gave it to the boy. Here, Ice-kun. Thank you, Akeno-senpai. Said girl giggled and walked back to the side of her king. Yufufu, he didn't ignore me. That gave the retreat a second tick mark. Issei, since when did you call Akeno by her first name? When the answer since before school today came, her right eye started to twitch. Her queen decided to explain it to her best friend. When I told Ice-kun that we want to discuss something after school, I told him that it was alright to call me Akeno. So Riaz, what did you want to discuss? The twitching got stronger after another yufufu from behind her. We wanted to go to the familiar forest to get Asia-chan a familiar, and we wondered if you want to come too. Familiar? You say? Yes, Ice-kun, a familiar. Akeno confirmed. At this confirmation, Issei's eyes began to slowly take on a distant and haunted appearance. A faint green light shined from within green and red dead fish eyes. An ominous and oppressive aura began to radiate from him. Familiar? Yes, that's right. I had a familiar. The image of the clubhouse had faded away in favor of a woman's face. She had purple hair and light purple eyes, with square pupils, with glasses covering them. A red marking was on her forehead, and she had a pink flower in her hair. Her full lips were curled into a small smile, with tiny fangs barely visible from behind her lips. Partner? Braig called out, attempting to snap his partner out of his trance. But she's gone. I failed. The image of a silhouette fading into glowing dust came to mind. Partner? Focus on my voice, don't focus on those memories. I remember her. She was my familiar, a Gorgon. Braig's voice didn't reach him. The Welsh dragon could do nothing to bring Issei out of his flashback. GRR. Damn it. Guess all I can do is keep his aura in check. Flashback. Issei landed with a thud, groaning as he sat up, the rainbow light of the Bifrost fading away as he rubbed his eyes. Akakami. That guy didn't even Bifrost me properly. Issei mumbled, recalling that one of the Norse gods had used the Bifrost to send Issei to another world. But where was he sent? Issei removed his hands from his eyes and looked around. The sky was dark and grey. All around him was a large old decrepit castle. The castle was made of stone. The stone had some moss growing on it and some cracks here and there, and the stone was largely black. The black stone immediately made him think of a castle in Greece. They bifrosted me to the human world, he exclaimed in disbelief only to pause, a realization dawning on him. The air wasn't right. It was foul, tainted. Though not polluted in the slightest. Issei sniffed the air several times, and his nose wrinked. He didn't like what he smelled. The air here is tainted with despair and malice. More than that, I feel funny. I feel like I'm in a dream. Issei frowned and focused on the flow of Kai in the area, using what he remembered learning about Senjutsu. Issei didn't like what he had sensed. He could feel death everywhere and a myriad of emotions that he could only comprehend as one singular thing. Suffering. More than that, the fabric of the world itself felt haunted. It felt inherently mystical and ominous. Eldritch, even. Nah, Drake. This place is some kind of limbo or purgatory, isn't it? It is. However, do not be afraid. You must remain focused, partner. Nodding, Issei stood up and stretched his arms above his head. Right, I'm here for my trial. Apparently, I'll be hunting something in this castle. Although, this castle already seems like a maze. Whatever it is I'm looking for, it'll be annoying to find it. Issei thought as he pulled out a piece of paper and looked. Conditions. Scale mail allowed. No Juggernaut drive. Fight blindly. Obtain FAMILIAR. Pretty basic stuff. Except for the end there. Wait. Obtain a familiar, the hell's that supposed to mean? You mean to tell me Shishu actually wants me to get a familiar here? It seems so, partner. No familiar yet, That's pretty boring. Find one. Find one, she says, as if it's that easy. What the hell am I, a beast tamer? I don't know which monsters can be turned into familiars and which can't. Isn't there some sort of criteria? But some of the things that Abasan told me about last week didn't seem like they were meant to be familiars. So I guess not. Issei sighed and put the paper back in his pocket and started to walk towards one of the paths inside, going up a staircase. Also, Drake, what the hell is fight blindly supposed to mean? I'm as clueless as you in this situation, partner. Kai. A weird noise. Sounds like a magical beast. Kai. Ah. It is. 3 magical beasts. They're just big green eyeballs with wings. Spew. Whoa. Issei dodged some acid that one of the eyeballs shot out. Drake, what are these? Irritados. Should I take them as a familiar? HMPH. Weak beings. Cannon fodder. No point, I would say. I see. Raikou. Boom. 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 Issei quickly fired 3 bolts of lightning and incinerated the monsters. Yeah. Pretty worthless. Haddon. Drake, you hear that? Yes. It seems to be coming from across the castle. Past that large staircase. Issei walked out of the area he was in and made it to a staircase. Past the staircase, he could see a large ballroom. In there? Yes. It came from there. Issei passed the staircase and walked into the entrance of the large ballroom. This place was probably where they held gatherings for high-class people. I can tell from experiencing events in a similar place in Abasen's palace. So the noise came from here. It's mostly barren aside from overturned tables. Drake, you feel that? Yes. Behind you. Yeah. It's similar to the feeling with those baby hydras. It's a type of serpent. Slide. Issei heard a slithering noise behind him. He turned around to see a tall figure that kept growing. The lightning gave visibility to the form. It was a woman. She had long purple hair and the sides of her cheeks had some scales. She was wearing a black mask over her eyes that had a red jewel in the middle of it. Her arms had some golden scales covering them, though not her hands, as if they were armor. But she wasn't tall nor was she growing. She was being lifted by her lower body. The lower body of a snake covered with golden scales. Her form almost resembled a lamia. Even more than that, there were heads of black snakes with no eyes and red markings at the ends of a few strands of her hair. Drake. Is that Medusa? Medusa herself was slain. But this is a Gorgon. So she can turn me to stone. Do you see the jewel on her mask? Yeah. Well. Yeah. The red jewel started shining. Look away. Issei immediately closed his eyes and looked to the left, materializing boosted gear. Balance break. Welsh Dragon balance breaker. Jumping backwards on instinct, Issei reached out and grabbed one of the snake heads. I see. Those snakes can lunge. Understanding the situation, Issei let go of the snake and balled his left fist, drawing the tiniest amount of blood. Draconic slasher. Boosted gear announced as the dragon blood fused with interconic energy to form a sword. I really need to figure out how to do that without shedding my blood. Issei thought to himself as he backed away. He wasn't sure about where the Gorgon was, but he knew she was in front of him. Issei was currently listening closely, keeping his senses sharp as he waited for an attack. Boost. Boost. The boosted gear announced Issei quadrupling his power, not being sure if he could keep up with the Gorgon without an increase in power. Issei's ears twitched behind the helmet, hearing a low hum. Jet. Issei immediately took off with the boosted gear's jetpack, shooting across the ballroom as a bluted energy beam trailed behind him. All the while, unable to see. Whoa. That was actually quite a powerful blast. I can't see the destruction, but my instincts tell me it would have hurt if I didn't dodge. Indeed. It wasn't bad. Not bad at all. Doesn't look like she can turn me to stone for some reason. Is it because I'm not looking at her eyes, or is it because my face isn't exposed? I do not believe it has to do with your eyes or your face. Rather, I believe it has to do with the fact that you have the armor of the Sekiryuutei. It may be too difficult to turn an existence like ours into stone without amazing power like Medusa. Moreover, it may be difficult because we are of similar origin. Serpent or reptilian beings. With armor which is a representation of the legendary Dragon Emperor, it must not be possible for it to freeze us. Huh. Looks like she's at a serious disadvantage. Against us, yes. But it seems like its powers would be quite useful against other beings. If you hadn't donned your armor, it may have been able to freeze you. Issei heard another hum right before another beam of energy and shot it at him, forcing Issei to dodge by flying around the room. Based on this power, she's actually a bit above high-class devils. I was right to boost back there, she's got a lot of bite to her attacks. In terms of raw power, I'm not quite at that level without boosting. Drake, you thinking what I'm thinking? It seems obvious, no? Well, at least we agree. Let's see what this viper can do. Boost. Boost. Issei smirked and opened his eyes, immediately making a beeline for the Gorgon. She sent some of her snake hairs at him, only for Issei to sever them with his energy blade. Reeling in pain from losing 3 of her snakes, the Gorgon wasn't able to avoid the heavy right hook to her gut. She coughed up spit from the punch, staggering backward, and let out a yelp as she was kicked away. She hissed as she positioned herself to be eye level with Issei, charging for him angrily. Issei dismissed his blade, letting it dissipate as he got into a martial arts stance. Issei dodged 2 consecutive claw swipes and ducked under her tail. 4 snakes lunged for him, but he easily batted them aside. As the tail came back around, Issei caught it with one hand and punched it away with the other. However, that brief moment of distraction was enough for a blast of red energy to hit him in the back. Issei hissed in pain and rolled forward, going with a stagger so he could avoid the follow-up. He was glad he did as chains shot through the space he used to occupy. His eyes followed the chains, and he quickly realized that they were from her hair. The hell she can turn her hair into chains whyy. He didn't have time to complain further as a giant spike tried to skewer him. He caught it, and his eyes followed the chain attached to it. She was wielding a makeshift chain blade, a chain with a spike at the end was in her clawed hands. She growled and swung another at him. Issei batted the chain aside. Only for her to roll with it. She spun with the chain, coming at him from the other side. He ducked underneath of it, only to be nailed by 5 separate chains. This caused him to drop the spike, and she caught the chain it was attached to, apparently having thrown it into the air when she spun before. This allowed her to swing with both of her weapons, the chains wrapping around his arms. She hissed at him as 2 of her snakes shot red energy at him. Issei's eyes widened as he realized he had no safe options. Damn it. She isn't a mindless beast. She's sentient. Issei grit his teeth. Mirror eyes. The illusory shield appeared in front of him, the crimson petals of the phantasmal eyes blocking the energy blasts. The petals of the crimson eyes began to break as it couldn't deflect the beams. 3 of the 4 layers were pierced. As the layers were shattered, Issei's armor was charred and chipped. When only the final layer remained, the attack stopped. Issei let the shield dissolve into phantasmal mist and petals that blew away to disappear into the ether. Issei gripped the chains with his gauntlets in an awkward manner, yanking the Gorgon to him as he used his armor's jetpack to propel himself forward. Using both of his legs to kick her in the face, the chains unraveling in the process. Now freed, Issei put distance between himself and the Gorgon. This time, when she shot her energy blast, Issei responded in kind. Dragon shot. The crimson beams met head-on, releasing a blinding flare of light when they exploded. However, Issei heard the sounds of chains quivering and a sound similar to an object flying through the air. Putting 2 and 2 together, Issei jumped to the side even while blind to avoid the chains. However, a spike pierced his right shoulder, causing Issei to hiss in pain as his vision cleared. He noticed the Gorgon was swinging her other spike. In a bit of a panic, Issei ripped the spike out of his shoulder and dashed towards the Gorgon. He punched her in the jaw, only to be harshly whipped by her tail. Grabbing her two spike weapons, Issei tore them from her hands and threw them away. He then dodged backwards in an attempt to avoid a claw swipe, only to be nailed by a gut punch. Staggering a little, Issei sidestepped a snake that lunged for him and kicked away another. However, chains shot from her hair and wrapped around his legs. The Gorgon started to whip her head around and flung him into a pile of rumble. Dazed and disoriented from the impact, Issei was hit by 3 blasts of energy head-on. Issei's armor was further singed by the blasts as the Gorgon slithered towards him, 2 snakes lining up to lunge. Issei erected a pillar of fire in front of him, causing the snakes to let out roars as they burned. Issei jumped to his feet and flew above the Gorgon, letting himself fall down to deliver an axe kick to her. She attempted to shoot chains at him, but he was able to easily sever them with well-timed and aimed bolts of lightning. Only 6. That must be her limit for how many she can make at once. Issei surmised as he delivered a heavyweight kick to her head, flipping over her to grab her tail. Boost. Issei doubled his power again, beginning to fly with his jetpack as he lifted her up by the tail. He spun the Gorgon around before he threw her towards the ground and dived after her, using his jetpack and a speed spell to maximize his speed. He held the contraction in his left arm, letting his muscles build up force for the punch as he focused energy there. And right before she hit the ground, he punched her right in the face. The force of the impact caused a bit of a windstorm and created a crater under Gorgon, knocking Issei back into the air. Ha! Ha! Ah! His dragon wings flapping, Issei floated above the Gorgon. His armor was still very intact, having only sustained surface-level damage during the fight. Aside from his shoulder wound, he was uninjured. The one who was breathing heavily was the Gorgon herself. She didn't even have her mask on, the punch having knocked it off or destroyed it. The fight wasn't long, either, having only lasted about 20 seconds. But it had been moderately difficult. Yep. She could definitely rip most high classes apart. I only survived because I'm used to this sort of thing and because I boosted and used scale mail. Issei thought to himself, only to be distracted from his thoughts by a loud hum. The Gorgon was charging energy blasts with multiple snake heads, these blasts being much stronger than before. Crap. If those hit me, they'll be able to break through my armor. Boost. Issei immediately doubled his power again and began to fly around the Gorgon, who was keeping her blasts right on his tail. The blasts were a much brighter red and were crackling with energy. Issei could even feel the heat through his armor. His armor ended up being melted at the surface from some of the blasts getting too close, causing Issei's eyes to widen. Boost. 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 He increased his power further and dashed towards Gorgon, avoiding chains as he did so. The blasts and chains became more and more erratic as he drew closer, some of the chains nailing him in the legs, and the outermost layer of his armor was quickly melting. Gritting his teeth, Issei cocked his fist back and punched the Gorgon in the abdomen. Her large body fell to the floor as she struggled to keep her breath. The battle was over, she could hardly move. Issei stepped around to the front of the Gorgon, looking down at her as Drake repaired his armor. Heh. She really is beautiful. Well, without the whole snake body and arms stuff. And the ones in her hair. Issei thought, only to hear an odd noise. The snake heads were releasing a purple smoke. The purple mist. Rats, must be poison gas. Yes. It seems to be very lethal. I suggest you keep your armor on so you don't feel any discomfort. Must be a last-ditch effort against me. Kill me. She spoke. So she can actually speak, huh, but. What was that? She kept her head down. I didn't catch it. Kill me. She's asking me to kill her. But why? Well. You have already defeated her. She sees no chance of victory. It was essentially just fighting to survive, nothing more. In that case, now that it cannot defeat you, it can assume no other outcome than death. So you mean she's resigned herself to death then? It seems so. You said she's not fulfilling any purpose. Nobody ever comes around here and the only inhabitants to this castle are other beasts. So she's really not doing anything around here. What happens if I leave her here? Nothing, I suppose. Issei looked to the Gorgon. Her posture spoke for itself, clearly indicating that she had no desire to fight. Even her snake seemed to appear downcast, as if they too were depressed. However, what stood out the most to Issei was that she was looking down. He was unable to see her face. So sad. Issei thought, the young boy pouting in response to the mental image of her beautiful face being marred with tears. He didn't want her to cry. Nah, you. Issei wanted to say cheer up or don't cry, but he could understand that it might not make much sense to her. Even so, the Gorgon lifted her head and looked at him. Her eyes were a light purple, and her pupils were square. They were moist, though she didn't seem like she was going to cry. Still, it was close enough to the boy. Even though she was glaring, there was a certain deadness to her eyes. Only covered by the way the unshed tears made them shimmer. Would you like to come work for me? Issei asked nervously. Fill me? She said it again. How odd. What is it, Drake? Well, according to legend, there are 3 Gorgons. Steno, Uriel, and Medusa. Out of the 3, Medusa was the only one who was mortal, and she was slain by the hero Perseus. And yet, this Gorgon is neither Steno or Uriel. Not to mention, it even possesses snakeheads in its hair. That was something unique to Medusa because she was cursed by Athena for fornicating with Poseidon. So then why does this one have them? Its aura is odd as well. It's a mixture of serene and chaotic. And her appearance as well. A beautiful woman with qualities that don't align with the legend. Could this be another Gorgon altogether? Issei blinked in response, but before he could think much into what Drake had said, a loud roar snapped him out of his thoughts. What is that? It sounded like a bull. Issei turned around and looked about the opposite end of the room. Across the ballroom, at the opposite entrance, stood a tall monster with the form of a bull. A minotaur. Say what one of those things from Greek mythology. What the hell is it doing here? I thought they were only supposed to be located in labyrinths. And wasn't there only one of them? Unfortunately, when it comes to legend, certain things can be vague. The classification for a labyrinth can be quite broad. You said earlier that this castle resembled a maze in its architecture. Minotaur find peace of mind in places like these, regardless of whether they are considered the traditional type of labyrinth. Also, there are many Minotaur. Any information suggesting otherwise is simply incorrect. Though, the classical story of the Minotaur in the labyrinth is true. Maybe I should have read further into those books rather than looking at the pages and saying, I don't want to fight that. Heh. Hearing a loud hissing noise, Issei turned back to the Gorgon. The snakeheads in her hair are hissing at the Minotaur, and she's glaring at it more than she did for me. Do they not like each other or something? Now I see. What is it, Drake? Minotaurs are quite territorial, partner. If there is anything roaming about this maze of the castle, then it would try to kill it. And there are many things here, including the Gorgon. From what it looks like, the Gorgon and the Minotaur have had some disputes in the past. He actually seems pretty strong. Oh, maybe making him my familiar would be better. What do you think, Drake? Is he stronger than the Gorgon? Yes, but not unreasonably so. In terms of whether it would make a better choice as a familiar, I believe it is stronger than the Gorgon, but I believe the potential for the Gorgon is much higher. A Minotaur is practically nothing but brute strength. From what it looks like, it doesn't seem like this Minotaur would experience much growth beyond this. It is stronger than high-class devils, and that is considered a good level amongst familiars, but you would feel more satisfied obtaining one that can become stronger, right? Besides, something about my instincts is persuading me to place my attention on the Gorgon. Yeah, same here. She has a mysterious feeling to her. It is a mystery. This is a being that shouldn't exist. Wow. Really, now you've got me interested. Once more the Minotaur roared at the duo. Or, more precisely, it roared at the Gorgon. The Gorgon hissed back, yet despite that, Issei couldn't help but feel that the Gorgon was somehow afraid. I see. This must be the reason why the Gorgon seemed exhausted even before we encountered it. It must have been low on stamina after escaping from this beast. This response is similar to a cornered animal after all. That must be the familiar feeling you're getting. I'm sure you've seen a similar reaction in canines. She's afraid this thing is gonna kill her. Even though she asked to die. Merely because it resigned its life, it does not mean it wishes to die. It may just mean that it saw no other option. Dying without a purpose would seem better than dying for what could possibly be an evil or cruel master. But if she's so afraid to die, then why offer her life? Why not just ask to be spared? I said it before, partner. It is fulfilling no purpose. It is only fighting to survive. Unlike the other monsters in this place, this Gorgon is not a mindless beast. It is aware of everything that happens around it. I would assume that even though it is afraid to die, it recognizes its own hollow existence. It is essentially something with nothing to live for. The Gorgon continued hissing at the Minotaur as the Welsh dragon and Sekiryuutei continued their mental conversation. The Gorgon's glare, while intimidating, also made the incredibly naive and compassionate Sekiryuutei sad. The lifelessness in her glare from before. That emptiness, it pulled at Issei's heartstrings. To him, that glare wasn't a threat. It was a cry for help. The hissing abruptly stopped, the Gorgon's line of sight blocked as Issei stepped in front of her. The Minotaur growled and roared at Issei. What? You telling me to move? The Minotaur huffed at him. Issei glanced back down at the confused Gorgon and gave a thumbs up. Too bad, I don't wanna. The Minotaur charged down the ballroom and Issei reciprocated its charge with his own. His fist collided with the Minotaur's snout, he then grabbed the Minotaur's face and slammed it into the ground. Breg. What's the best way to kill this thing? Depends. Do you want to impress the Gorgon or do you want the easiest way to kill it? impressed the Gorgon. Right. In that case, the old-fashioned way. Jumping back to avoid the Minotaur's headbutt, Issei waited for the bull to get back on its feet. Issei charged to the bull, reinforcing his armor with runes as he proceeded to exchange blows with the Minotaur. Issei didn't bother to block, instead opting to trade attacks with the beast. He met the creature's fist with his own, aiming a knee for its gut. The Minotaur powered through it and attempted to headbutt him, but Issei sent a haymaker to its jaw to deflect the blow. He took a punch to the gut and responded by jabbing the Minotaur in its Adam's apple. It made a really deep and low sound, akin to a gasp, as Issei punched the bull several times in the chest. Issei took a kick to the kidney, being knocked back by the force, but spun around to face the Minotaur again. Issei dashed forward once again, fist meeting fist. 13 times, their fists met before one of the Minotaur's fingers broke. It let out a low wail, recoiling in pain. Taking advantage of the opening, Issei's shoulder bashed its torso, tackling it to the ground. The Minotaur and dragon wrestled for barely 2 seconds before Issei managed to get it in a headlock with his legs. He gripped onto a horn of the Minotaur and began to pull. The Minotaur roared in pain as the horn was ripped out before being roughly and incorrectly placed back into its socket. The horn pierced the bull's brain, killing it. Issei stood up and sighed in relief, looking around and quickly seeing the Gorgon. Without the mask, it should be safe to show her your face. I doubt she can turn us to stone without the mask's help. Issei nodded as he walked towards her. Ah, good, you're still here. He said casually as he dematerialized his helmet, dropping to one knee to look the Gorgon in the eye. She seemed surprised to see the face of a young boy behind the mask, a boy no older than 11. It would have been bad if you'd ran. Heir, slithered away and gotten hurt. The Gorgon looked at him without responding. Issei smiled nervously and rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Sorry for being so rough earlier. I didn't mean to give you the impression I was trying to kill you or anything. Heh. Still no reaction. Look. I'm not going to hurt you more than I already have. I already feel like shit for hurting you before. Issei scratched at his cheek nervously, not really sure how to approach the Gorgon. Ah. About what I said earlier. You see, I'm a devil. Well, part of one anyway. And I need a familiar. So if you were to come serve me, you would be my familiar. And I would be your master. You would help me in my fights and stuff like that, not that I'd put you through anything you can't handle though. I'm not an abusive bastard so I wouldn't hurt you myself. Even so, she didn't respond. I can't promise you that I would be able to make you happy myself, but I can at least give you a home. He extended his hand to her. Her reaction was subtle. Her glare was still present, but her eyes sparkled a little. Her snakes that had their attention focused on Issei leaned back a bit. But there was no other response. I see. Issei rose to his feet and started to walk away. Well, at least you won't have to worry about that thing anymore. Issei sighed dejectedly as he gestured towards the dead Minotaur. His armor dematerialized as he walked out of the ballroom. Just before he stepped out of the room. Wait. He paused and glanced back at the Gorgon. You. Who. Who are you? Issei. Hi to Issei. I'm the current Sekiryuutei, a Shinto demigod. The boy chirped, smiling at her. Very well. What was that? She answered firmly. I shall serve you. Issei did an about-face and ran back to the ballroom. Why you mean you'll be my familiar? The Gorgon nodded slowly as Issei squealed happily and pumped his left fist. Suddenly, Issei's face turned hard and the stars vanished from his eyes. Ah. That's right, since you're sentient, we have to establish a contract. Do you know the procedure? She nodded. Issei held out his left hand and carefully carved a magic circle into the ground using electric energy, taking care to not hurt the Gorgon. Then he clenched his left hand, boosted gear drawing his blood again. He allowed the blood to drip into the magic circle. From dragon to snake, from one serpent to another, I hereby claim this Gorgon. Sign this contract with blood and become my familiar. The Gorgon nodded and scratched her palm, easily slicing the porcelain-like skin. Blood flowed from her hand into the magic circle. I accept. Issei smiled as the ceremony finished. Alright, I need to touch you to heal you, so don't bite me. Alright. The Gorgon nodded and opened her mouth to speak, only to be cut off as she felt something ruffle her hair. All it took was a glance upward for her to see Issei smiling as he affectionately patted her head. What are you doing? What does it look like? I'm touching you, silly. I know that. But why my head? Why didn't you just take my hand? Issei blinked in response and tilted his head to the side. You looked sad before and I wanted to cheer you up. So I gave you head pats. Do you not like it? The Gorgon went silent, biting her lip as she suddenly looked rather shy, blushing softly. Transfer. Issei transferred his power to the Gorgon after he finished healing her. All of her minor wounds had vanished. Issei stepped back and smiled brightly. There. You should be fine until we get home. Issei chirped, extending his hand for her to take. Thank you. She said softly, looking at him somewhat warily. You're welcome. What should I call you? The Gorgon looked down and made a somber expression. I don't have a name. She whispered. Well. What should I call you then? Issei asked as he scratched his cheek. Gorgon, call me Gorgon. Issei blinked before he smiled and nodded. Alright, Gorgon-san, I promise I'll take good care of you. Issei chirped as he offered his familiar his hand. Then flashback. Gorgon. Issei whispered lifelessly. A thick, heavy, and oppressive aura rolled off of him like a miasma. His aura almost seemed poisonous, in fact. Gorgon. Akeno. Isn't that the monster Perseus killed? Yes, it is, but you. And it seems mentioning familiars has given him flashbacks. So I'd say Ice-kun had a Gorgon as a familiar. Everyone in the room was surprised by Akeno's deduction, largely because it seemed somewhat absurd, but they could not deny it. It made sense, after all. I have an idea. Everyone, stand back. Fufufu Akeno giggled as lightning sparked around her, electrocuting Issei with golden lightning. Ai, he screamed in pain, his volume rapidly going from a whisper to a scream. And the miasma filling the room vanished. Akeno stopped and Issei looked around, seeming in a daze. Where am I? What's going on? Issei questioned. You went into a trance and were releasing a strange aura. It was almost like a poisonous gas. Kiba said, bringing Issei into the present. I did. I see. Yeah, and you mentioned a Gorgon, what was that about, Issei? Gorgon-chan. My familiar. I fought her when we first met all those years ago. As it turned out, she had actually been really shy. Though, she became fierce and cold in battle. She was beautiful. There is no denying that. She had pretty, golden scales and purple hair. And she was nice. She was stronger than high-class devils, she was as loyal as she was dangerous. I couldn't have asked for a better familiar. But, one day, years ago, she was at the wrong place at the wrong time. And was killed. Was left unspoken. Everyone looked down at that, and it was Asia who broke the silence by quickly attaching herself to Issei, looking like she was about to cry. Poor Issei-san. That's so sad. So we should get Issei-san a familiar to make him feel better. Asia said with a surprising amount of conviction. Yeah? Sure. Why not? Wouldn't hurt to try, would it? Issei said with all the enthusiasm he could muster while he rubbed Asia's back, looking at her to anchor himself to the present. You won't leave me, will you? Was the question that went unasked. The Prince of Devils simply found himself unable to form the words. However, Kiba came to the man's rescue. Then you want to come with us? Issei nodded at his first and only pupil. But you? Kiba said, a question in his tone. In that case, we'll leave tonight. We'll have to make adjustments to the circle so Issei can make it, since he seems to be different from a devil. Riaz responded. Of course, Issei made no attempt to clarify that he had demonic blood. Riaz looked to Asia afterwards. Asia, why don't you ask Issei-kun to help you hand out the leaflet? Said former nun, blushed and looked up to Issei with a secret weapon he learned to loathe. The puppy dog eyes. A certain black-haired Maou always used it on him when he was young. And even after all this time, he still had no resistance against it whatsoever. Can you help me, Issei-san? Of course. He answered and nodded without a second thought. And my body moved on its own. I can't believe Sarah-chan trained me in something like this. I feel like a pet. The young man moved over to the king of the peerage and took the box of leaflets from her. I will come back with Asia after we're finished. Yes, that's fine. I think we will have the circle ready in about 2 hours. Riaz gave a quick nod and sat down on her seat again. Some time later. Issei and Asia returned half an hour ago. There was nothing noteworthy that happened, well besides Asia's unbelievable talent to trip over everything. Even air. They sat down on the couch and talked with the knight and Rook about trivial things. Issei-san, Riaz, but you said that you fought against Onisik-san and the exorcists all by yourself, is that true? The innocent nun asked him while tilting her head to the side. Yes, he was a low-level fallen, it was really easy. Really easy, he said. All devils, with the exception of Asia, thought that. The corner of the room shone in a bright red light before it dimmed to a light glow. Alright everyone, we are ready to depart. Riaz said while she and Akeno stood in front of the teleportation circle. The other occupants of the room made their way over to them. All of them stood in the center of the rotating magic formula with Asia and Akeno awfully close to the dragon. Once we arrive in the forest, the familiar master will come to greet and guide us. The Grimoire heiress looked at her servants and Issei one after another, receiving a nod from everyone. The circle once again shone in a bright light that swallowed everyone in it. The group appeared in the middle of a creepy-looking forest. The trees were black and looked dead, the sky had the color of blood mixed with purple, and there was an almost transparent layer of fog in the air. So, this is the familiar forest. It doesn't look like a comfortable place to live. Issei mused absent-mindedly while Asia got behind him and grabbed his blazer. The red-haired devil wanted to say something, but was interrupted by a voice from behind. My, looks like I got a few visitors here in my forest. I assume that you are the Gremory princess. The group turned around to see a woman around 20 with midnight black hair. She wore brown boots over black stockings. A white shirt was under her open black long-sleeved blouse. She had one hand at her also black skirt and the other pushed a single strand of hair behind her ear. Yes, that's right. Are you the current familiar master? Riaz answered, doing the same gesture that the woman before them did. A glimmer of amusement danced in her pale green eyes when she noticed it and gave an elegant light bow and a smile. That is not fully true. I am no more than an apprentice. I hope that I can help you tonight. How come an apprentice is the one guiding us? I thought only the master has the qualification for this. The king of the peerage asked the woman in front of her. Ah. Well, that is generally correct, this is a special case. Since tonight is the last test for me before I will become the new master of this forest. Is that so? Then I hope that you will pass this test. Thank you very much. This apprentice named Natasha Elsas will guide you to your ideal familiar tonight. She once again gave a quick bow before she walked closer to them. So what kind do you wish to acquire? Asia looked nervously up and blushed a little. I want to see cute one. Her voice lost on volume the longer she talked until it was nothing more than a whisper. A cute one, huh? Nothing comes to mind, so let's go look around for a bit. Natasha turned around and begun to lead the group. By the way, if I may ask, why is a human with your group, Miss Gremory? I stopped another great war from starting, so they owe me a favor. The favor is letting me get a familiar. Issei told the apprentice nonchalantly. Technically, Issei was speaking the truth. Nothing he said was a falsehood. That was what made the half-truth entirely believable to any outside observers. However, to anyone in the know, they would see something somewhat suspicious. Issei walked towards the apprentice and she whispered something into his ear. Not even Kaneko, with her enhanced senses, could hear it. So then, sir, what kind of familiar would you like? Do you have any dragons? Well, there are sprite dragons here, but they almost never show themselves, so they are out. There are also a few low-level dragons here and there, but taming them is more trouble than they are worth. The only useful one would be Tiamat Dono, but she is one of the 5 dragon kings and hates devils. So, I would recommend you to look for something else. Natasha said, looking to her side to see Issei was gone. Did anyone see where the man went? Natasha questioned, yet the collective that came from the group proved she wasn't the only one who was surprised by his disappearance. The reason they had lost sight of him was because he had leaped high into the air and hundreds of meters away too fast to be seen. He achieved such a feat thanks to his superhuman physical ability and the use of magic. Greg. One of the Dragon Kings is here. Issei exclaimed silently with a crazed smile on his face. Yes. And it's Tiamat. She'll kill you. Really now? Let's find out. Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker. Jet. The crimson dragon armor materialized around him, the jetpack flaring to life as the wings spread out on his back. Following his senses and instincts, Issei quickly found himself over a cave, and his armor disappeared as he descended to the ground slower than he should have, as if defying gravity. In front of him was a big cave, easily 5 sizes the height of him. Is someone in here? No answer. Hello? Tiamat-sama. He said a bit louder. Again no answer. Tiamat-sama. This time he shouted. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Oh no. This is not going to end well. You're annoying. What do you want? Out of the cave came a massive aquamarine blue western dragon with deep ocean blue eyes. She looked down on him with a really annoyed stare. I heard a lot about you from a friend, so I really wanted to meet you. He gave her a toothy grin. Tiamat was not amused about it one bit. And why did it have to be now, when I'm taking my nap? Since I'm not a devil I had to come now, I don't know if I'll get another chance. Sorry for waking you. He gave her a quick bow. You are not a devil. Then what are you? There is no way for a normal human to come all the way here. A mistake. Issei answered with a somber expression. His mind went back to the fate of his parents and his Gorgon, and the betrayal. Painful memory after painful memory flashed through his mind. And he was beginning to grow angry. And the focus of his ire was none other than Tiamat. Greg. Change of plans. Partner, please. I'm begging you to reconsider. Think rationally. Not happening. When Issei looked back up to Tiamat, his eyes were slits. Tiamat's eyes narrowed as Issei's expression slowly twisted into a feral grin. He clapped his hands twice and a large barrier appeared. He then pulled out 5 talismans and threw them into the air. One went up to the center of the dome, while the other 4 embedded themselves into the 4 corners. Wouldn't want anyone to interrupt us, now, would we? Tiamat scowled. Are you a dragon slayer? She asked him, warily. Not by a long shot. I'm the current Sekiryuutei. Issei said as boosted gear manifested on his left arm. So you are the current host of Drag, she screeched in fury. Tiamat. Please calm down. I know you hate me, but can we please talk civilly? Drag pleaded as a fierce hurricane began to form around the dragon, pushing Issei back. You've already killed about 3 of my past hosts, so can we sit down and discuss about this? Growling, Tiamat's cold eyes began to glow an icy blue color as she continued to glare at the teen. You lost the chance for us to talk civilly after what you did, Drag. So she's Tiamat. The strongest and the only female dragon from the 5 great dragon kings, the Chaos Karma dragon. I've always wanted to fight a dragon king. Issei with a grin. Welsh dragon balance breaker. Boosted gear announced as the scale mail materialized around Issei, his aura a deep red that clung to his form like a miasma. In a flash, Tiamat was on him and trying to eviscerate him with her claws. Issei's eyes widened a little, but he did not panic. He was used to fighting enemies who were both bigger and more powerful than himself. Instead, he jumped back, raised one knee, and crossed his arms, allowing him to minimize the damage to merely a glancing blow to his limbs. Despite it being merely a glancing blow, it pierced his armor easily and was a hair's breadth away from breaking skin. The force so great that it rattled his skeleton and sent fissures throughout his armor. Wow. Just one scratch and she nearly blew away my scale mail, Issei mentally exclaimed in shock, but he did not panic. Instead, he bared his teeth in a feral smile. He was excited. Drag, repair the armor. He ordered, barely rolling under her arms fast enough to avoid the claw swipes. Feeling his armor start to repair itself, Issei focused energy in his left hand. Dragon shot. Quickly pouring all the energy he could into the sphere, he launched the largest dragon shot he could muster at her sensitive underbelly. It made the dragon yelp and jump away, hissing angrily. Boost. Doubling his power, Issei took a deep breath and storm clouds appeared above him. O thunder, be my shield. Ragin no Yoroi. He incanted, forming a more sophisticated and ornate armor of lightning over top his scale mail. Tiamat's eyes narrowed as she started to breathe in deeply through her mouth. Mirror eyes. Casting his defensive spell, now with 6 petals, Issei was able to completely block her flame's attack. Sensing his opponent approaching, Issei began powering up again. Boost. 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 At the last second, Issei stopped boosting and coated his left fist with energy. He propelled himself upward with his jetpack and threw an uppercut with his left arm. The blow struck the dragon in the chin and knocked her off balance, allowing Issei to launch a flurry of kicks at her sensitive snout and eyes, which he finished off with an axe kick to her forehead. Tiamat roared as she hit the ground and violently shook her head, flaring her wings as she shot up at supersonic speeds. Impressive speed and acceleration for a beast her size, but Issei was faster. Jet. Boosted gear announced as Issei flew up and formed magic circles under the Dragon King, firing bolts of rainbow-colored magical energy at her wings. Having her wings momentarily clipped, Tiamat had no way of defending as Issei turned around and dived for her. Assisted by his jetpack and not needing to go against gravity, Issei was able to reach Tiamat before her upward momentum wore off. Tiamat collided with Issei's haymaker head-on, however her wings were able to recover before she hit ground. Flapping them to generate lift once again, Tiamat directed the air itself to rip and tear at Issei's armor. Surprised by the clever tactic, Issei's armor was chipped and scratched in numerous places. And in nearly a dozen places, blood seeped out of fine and razor-thin cuts that managed to break skin. Heh. So this is the power of a Dragon King, it's even more amazing than I expected. Issei's smile grew to an unnatural size as Drag repaired the armor. He charged towards Tiamat with both his fists glowing with energy. Sensing a change in the atmosphere, Issei created his own blades of wind to meet Tiamat's own as he charged. Issei weaved around a bite and flew under a claw swipe, beginning to focus additional lightning around his fists and forearms. Once again under Tiamat, Issei began to deliver a barrage of energy-enhanced and lightning-infused punches to Tiamat's stomach. Screaming in pain as the electrical current in her body grew stronger and stronger, Tiamat was utterly paralyzed. In a furious panic, she started to discharge her flames widely. However, they could nothing to the man who was already multiple stories under her. Boost. 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 Let's see how you like this. Boost. 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 Explosion. Issei released all of his built-up power into his body. He began launching spears of divine energy at Tiamat as he began to focus even more lightning around his fists, along with draconic energy. His fists glowed crimson as white, black, gold, crimson, blue, purple, and green lighting crackled around his hands and forearms. Once Tiamat was nearly directly above him, Issei fired off the built-up power. Electric judgment. Issei shouted in a booming voice like a burst of thunder. Blasting Tiamat with a torrent of multicolored lightning and energy, Issei smirked as his gamble worked out. It had been a stretch, something he wasn't sure about. He'd never tried it before, but as he was fighting Tiamat, he had an idea. Tiamat had natural scaly armor over thick leathery skin, just attacking her with unaimed lightning wouldn't be effective. If he wanted his lightning to be effective, he would need a way to make it naturally target weak points on her body. The dilemma was, how was he to direct a storm to target only certain things? The answer? A lightning rod. He had crystallized the energy spears in a way that mimicked the subatomic shape of copper, hoping that his spears and lightning would behave like their scientific counterparts. As luck would have it, they did. The lightning was attracted to his strategically placed spears, funneling the lightning into certain spots. These spots being the joints, the tips of her wings, her forehead, her abdomen, the end of her tail, and the middle of her back. The lightning danced between the spears as it flowed into her body, paralyzing the dragon as she screamed in agony. Her body being subjected to extreme nerve damage and internal burning. Reset. Boosted gear announced as Issei's power was reset to default. But since he hadn't reached or gone over his limit, he wasn't out of the fight. However, neither was Tiamat. Despite the damage she had suffered, she wasn't finished. Even as she fell towards the ground, twitching and flailing from the electric current, her external wounds were already starting to heal. Breathing heavily, Issei did his best to absorb the stray energy his attack had left behind. Even though it wouldn't give him all of his power back, it would restore most of his unaugmented power, as the stray energy was released while boosted. Tiamat hit the ground with a thud, groaning from pain and frustration. He used lightning. One of my few weaknesses. And from the looks of it, that attack of his multiplies the power put into it. He even targeted weak points. Damn. Clever bastard, no matter how much I get my scales and hide to resist lightning, my insides will always be vulnerable to it. A blue light shone from Tiamat to reveal a woman with blue hair and eyes, pale skin, and a more than desirable figure in a one-piece dress. She had a necklace around her neck with a sapphire that rested above her ample bust, glowing a soft blue. Sparks danced around her as steam rolled off her body, breathing heavily as the various burns and light injuries marring her milky white skin steadily faded. Not bad. Brat. It seems my normal form is too large to handle you. She said with an odd tone that was clearly annoyed, although displayed an undertone of begrudging respect with an overall blanket of exhaustion covering her words. Issei's eyes widened slightly as he slowly landed, rage and no yoroi still active. Heh. You live up to your reputation and then some, Tiamat-sama. Issei said, smiling behind his helmet. Only for said smile to swiftly turn into a frown. Although. It's irritating. I couldn't exchange blows with you at all. My armor doesn't protect much against blunt trauma, something you had in spades. And you were too durable to realistically cause you any actual damage. So I had to rely on a cheap tactic to exploit the only weakness most dragons have. Tiamat's lips curled into a feral smile as she formed a sort of blue energy. Is that so, Sekiryuutei boy? Well. She used her free hand to brush her hair back as she flipped it. I think you'll find I'm a lot softer in this form. She shouted as she charged Issei and swung her sword. He barely managed to dodge only to be struck by a kick to his side. Issei doubled over and coughed up blood in his helmet. Tiamat continued to smile like a wolf, whispering near his ear as she punched him in the gut. You'll find I'm a lot faster too. She then flipped away, kicking him in the chin in the process. Draconic slasher. Boosted gear announced as crimson blades grew from his gauntlets. Issei straightened his posture to look Tiamat in the eye. Beady, hunting green eyes stared into deep blue orbs. Issei got into an offensive stance and waited for Tiamat to make her move. Whoosh. She moved at blinding speeds, in front of him in the blink of an eye. Issei immediately backstepped and did a crosscut for her neck, forcing her to defend. Issei followed it up with an overhead chop, which Tiamat managed to dodge. However, the second she had started to move backwards, Issei had already thrust outward with one of his swords. However, Tiamat gracefully parried it, using the parry to lead into her own thrust. Issei swiftly caught the blade between his two swords and kicked her in the shin, before stepping to the side and roundhouse kicking her in the back of the head. She gasped, her hair going rigid as Issei aimed a chop to her neck, but the girl barely spun around in time to parry it. She immediately breathed a puff of smoke at his helmet as she jumped backwards to disengage. Damn it. This brat is good. But I wonder if he'll be able to keep up once my body fully heals. Tiamat relaxed her posture as she closed her eyes, calming herself a little and reaffirming her motivation and focus. Opening her now cat-like eyes, a large and feral grin made its way onto her features. She wore a bloodthirsty smile. Issei shook the smoke away and let out a small growl, looking to Tiamat once again. However, looking at her now, he couldn't help but feel a little unnerved. As a tornado began to appear around her, pale blue sparks dancing around her body, Issei was reminded that he was fighting a Dragon King. Not just any Dragon King though, he was fighting the Dragon Queen, strongest of all Dragon Kings, and the 5th strongest dragon currently alive. While she was furious, he was fighting a pissed off Tiamat-sama. As Issei watched her eyes visibly glow with murderous intent with a storm around her, Issei couldn't help but recall his training. Flashback. Issei. You're a descendant of 2 gods and Lucifer. That means you have abilities inherited from multiple sources. If you want to live up to your granddad's legacy, it won't be enough to just use those powers well, you need to combine them. Combine your blood magic with your authority of storms. Destroy your mate snake without moving. Okay. I think I understand. The young boy answered. Ready? Set. Go. And with that, the ethereal black snake sprung into action. Acting quickly, Issei erected a barrier. It wouldn't last forever, but Issei hoped it was enough. I can do this. I can do this. Shakily, he took a breath. And another. And another. He clenched his fist and drew some blood, letting it fall to the ground. Electrical energy danced around him as a storm brewed in the sky above, a large magic circle appearing under him before rapidly cycling like a compass. The wind howled, thunder roared, and blood sizzled. The red mist was carried by the wind and rose up as it mixed in with the clouds. The clouds turned a pinkish red, the lightning turning a deep crimson as blood fell like rain. The clouds began to rotate at various points, forming funnels. Suddenly, 3 F5 tornadoes of blood shot down and began to converge on the snake and merged into one giant twister that quickly shredded the phantasmal serpent. Issei. I'm throwing another orb, try not to die. The psychopath threw a sphere of black light at Issei, who, seeing he was backed into a corner and knowing none of his spells worked, had an epiphany. Before, he had created tornadoes of blood. What if he produced them from himself instead of the clouds and had them spin vertically? Extending one hand, 5 magic circles appeared on the arm. A powerful cyclone of blood shot out sideways, acting like a funnel as the orb entered it. He could feel the ball attempting to break through, yet Issei was nothing if not stubborn. He grit his teeth and held the cyclone together, spinning it faster and faster. Steadily, he began to compress the orb into a smaller size and make it spin faster and faster. And then he let go. The magical cannonball shot off at relativistic speeds and disintegrated one of the many moons of the strange world. Issei growled as the massive ball of ice fell towards him. And something inside the little demigod snapped. Damn you, Leviathan Raya, Issei roared. All the blood in the battleground began to form into long swords which swiftly caught on fire. Issei shot them all off to meet the ice ball at Mach 50. Hundreds, if not thousands, of burning blood swords collided with the ice ball and destroyed it. Then flashback. That could work. Issei realized as the memories flashed before him. Ordinarily, he didn't want to use it because he didn't want to return to that state. He didn't want to be a monster. But as he was at that moment, the world beyond the battle an afterthought, he wasn't so concerned about that. Winning was much higher on his list of priorities. Boost. 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 I am the ocean, I am the lightning, I am the wind. Issei incanted as the spell he used so long ago began once more. Black clouds gathered overhead, electrical energy dancing around Issei in greater amounts than before, and the magic circle appeared and began to cycle. Wind howled and thunder roared, Issei's blood riding the wind to the sky above. Boost. 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 What's he doing? Tiamat thought to herself. The clouds gained their pinkish hue as lightning became a deep crimson, and a rain of blood began. I am the Blood Prince, I am the King of Storms. The clouds began to rotate in several places and suddenly became 15 tornadoes. I am the Lord of Hell. The blood suddenly ignited, dark crimson flames being twisted up in the cyclones. Reign of Terror's just begun. Issei chanted. Alpha Force Booster. Suddenly, Issei's power exploded to be on par with a Juggernaut Drive, a massive inferno that burned up the surrounding vegetation, and Fiona engulfed him. He knew it wouldn't last, though. Issei was pushing his luck with this, and he knew it. But for what reason did limits exist if not to be broken through? Malum Typhoon. Issei finished. Transfer. After pushing his balance, breaker strength to equal the Juggernaut Drive Long-Ina Smasher, Issei transferred the power into his spell, which set him back to the unboosted Juggernaut Drive, as his booster spell was still in effect. The tornadoes began to rotate at superluminal speeds as the flames burned like supernovas, the twisters rapidly converging on Tiamat. Oh shit. Tiamat screamed as the tornadoes consumed her, the barrier shattering like glass. Shatter. Issei's Kalemail evaporated as he fell to the ground with a thud, breathing heavily. Blood leaked from his eyes and mouth, and many of his bones were broken. His nerves felt like they were on fire, his blood vessels felt as if they were filled with acid, and his muscles felt as if they were melted. Many of his organs were damaged as well. Going too far with the boosted gear and his blood magic, as well as using his greatest trump card, it seemed as the price was greater than he anticipated. As the blood faded and the storm disappeared, Issei saw that the Chaos Karma Dragon wasn't much better. She was panting heavily, covered in cuts, bruises, burns, scratches, scrapes, and the like. Entire scales had been ripped from her body, and she was missing a leg. Damn it. Brat. Not bad. If I stayed in my human form, I'd be dead. Tiamat managed to get out. It is an honor. Issei wheezed out, barely holding on to consciousness. To be praised so much by a dragon king, Tiamat-sama. Brat. Why did you challenge me? Tiamat questioned. Issei remained silent for a long time before speaking. I think it's because I wanted to see where I stood. How far that is from me still. That, and I didn't think you'd want to be a familiar to a weakling. Heh. Got that right, brat. Tell you what, if we both survive, I'll go with you. Issei smiled as his vision started to go black. I was close, right? You're proud of me, aren't you, princess? I'm sure she is, partner. I certainly am. You managed to defeat Tiamat after all. None of my past hosts ever did. I'm glad. Everything went black and silent. That's it, guys. Thanks for watching and supporting us. See you in the next part.